It's about Malcolm X and, unsurprisingly to many, the FBI's likely involvement. The two people who were actually long accused of killing Malcolm X have been exonerated. This is in Ceylon. Did the FBI order Malcolm X's murder? New revelations raise an old question. Two innocent men have been exonerated, but Malcolm was surrounded by FBI informants on the day of his death. There's a lot suspicious about this, you guys. Just a few days before the city of New York removed the oversized statue of Thomas Jefferson from the city council chamber, Manhattan District Attorney Cyrus Vance asked a state court judge to vacate the convictions of two men who were wrongfully convicted for the murder of civil rights visionary Malcolm X in 1965 at the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem. While moving the statue may seem heavy lifting, it's nothing compared to the inner fortitude required to revisit the ongoing race-based injustices that victimize people of color who are living now and continue to feel the lash of punitive, racist, and often corrupt law enforcement. Exonerations of wrongfully convicted Black men now come with such frequency that they show up at the end of the newscast just before the weather and the stock quotes. There can be no greater validation of critical race theory than regularly tracking these cases in all their gory detail. Vance, who was in his final days in office, told the court that Muhammad Abdul Aziz, who is still living at age 83, and Khalil Islam, who died in 2009, had been the victims of unacceptable violations of the law and the public trust on a massive scale that easily crossed over the line into something far more sinister than your run-of-the-mill racial profiling. Quote, but what we have obtained now in this reinvestigation are numerous materials that my office tragically did not have in 1965 and thus did not turn over to the defense, Vance told the court. Quote, most critically, we have obtained dozens and dozens of reports from the FBI and the NYPD's Bureau of Special Services and Investigations, and significantly, we now have reports revealing that on orders from Director J. Edgar Hoover himself, the FBI ordered multiple witnesses not to tell police or prosecutors that they were, in fact, FBI informants. Vance continued, quote, many of these documents were exculpatory. Many of them were disclosed. None of them were disclosed to the defense. Without these files, it is clear these men did not receive a fair trial and their convictions must be vacated. Moreover, under the unique circumstances presented by a 55-year-old case, there can be no retrial on any of the charges contained in the indictment. Therefore, the people believe the indictment against Mr. Aziz and Mr. Islam should be dismissed. So there's a lot to get into here. But there was already massive suspicion about the circumstances surrounding the murder of Malcolm X and the FBI's likely involvement and the NYPD's likely involvement. Malcolm had been targeted by numerous attempts on his life or plotted attempts on his life, and therefore he often had pretty substantial security, including local law enforcement, when he would be in public. This particular day, there was very little. And it turned out that some of the people who were thought to just be regular civilians surrounding him were actually FBI and NYPD informants. There's also the fact that one individual involved in Malcolm's death was immediately apprehended that day. We know he was involved, and he has consistently, since 65, how many years, he has said that the two men who were convicted of Malcolm's death had nothing to do with it. And he's even dropped names of others who were involved. And yet law enforcement and the Justice Department did fuck all about it. They did nothing. They let these two men rot away in prison for decades, knowing full well that the best piece of evidence that they had, the best piece of testimony they had, exonerated those men. And it just raises further suspicion that, in the sense that makes it seem all the more likely that those who actually were involved probably did have those connections, right? Because why else would this have been so covered up? If those were just random people that assassinated Malcolm X, there would be no pushback to getting it right. There would be no reason not to go get it right, right? But what they did is they covered this up, and I think that makes it seem awfully suspicious that the FBI and the New York police force were involved. And we all know how it's been extensively revealed the extent to which the FBI was already attempting to disrupt the civil rights movement at the time, including Nation of Islam and Malcolm X. They were trying to drive divisions between these groups, and this has all become public. They were doing undercover operations to try to separate and divide and keep the movement from gaining any sort of momentum or having any sort of strength. So it all lines right up with the way that we know the FBI behaves, the way that we know Hoover behaved, the way that we know the NYPD behaves. And it all lines up with the narratives at the time that the civil rights movement was being infiltrated by law enforcement, and and that these attempts to cripple that movement were obviously openly ongoing. So the FBI, you guys, it really just needs to go. It's not any different from a local police force, in my view, and policy, in the sense that we need to abolish and replace those institutions with institutions that are actually designed to protect and serve the public, instead of what we currently have. And obviously, police departments and the FBI do nothing of the sort. What they do is further oppress. They inflict violence upon poor and marginalized communities. They divide movements that are designed to liberate people, democratic movements, right? Pro-worker, pro-labor movements. One of their primary roles is to cripple the left effectively. And they just need to go. It's really, really that simple. They just need to go. Anyone who has taken just a few minutes to look into the history of the FBI, I think, would agree with me on that. And this story just kind of confirms those things that we already knew, that they're involved in more crime than they stop. You guys, they create these plots so that they can justify their own existence, and then they end up contributing to crime and violence, and destabilizing our society, dividing us up, all this kind of stuff. And the Malcolm X story also confirming what we already knew about the FBI, that they want nothing to do with these movements. In fact, they want to cripple them as best they possibly can. So do not trust the FBI, and we will keep an eye out on that Malcolm X story. Two men basically gave their entire lives. I mean, one of them's out now, but he's in his 80s, right? So they gave their entire lives for nothing. The FBI took not only Malcolm's life, but these two men's life as well. So another critical story that